Good Friday afternoon. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host for this edition of Border Report Live, coming to you from the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, just along the border of the Rio Grande. Lots to talk about today. We have our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, our El Paso correspondent, Julian, both going to be joining us to talk about a whole host of subjects this afternoon. But let's start with some of the things making headlines across the border, beginning with more troops are now sharing command stations and vehicles with federal immigration officials at the border under an emergency declaration from President Donald Trump. There's now an Army official leading 7,600 troops and an assortment of helicopters and drones. And he says the military has been freed from menial work to help apprehend immigrants, protect newly designated militarized zones, and disrupt smuggling cartels. Now, we told you about some of those recent additions to military zones, one of them right here in along the border here in the Rio Grande Valley. Now, in some cases, those soldiers deployed to this operation are themselves immigrants. The Associated Press captured these photos of the troopers in Nogales, Arizona, and Sunland Park, New Mexico. Also happening, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says deportation flights from the immigration lockup facility known as Alligator Alcatraz started over the past few days. Now, those flights are operated by Homeland Security, and they've transferred about 100 detainees from that immigration detention center to other countries. Now, Governor DeSantis says he does expect that number to start increasing soon. Officials say 2 or 3 flights have happened already, though they didn't say which countries those flights were actually headed to, something we talked about earlier this week. And critics have condemned the facility as cruel and inhumane, but here in Texas, our U.S. Senator John Cornyn said earlier this week that he would like a similar detention center up right here in the Lone Star State. Now, another thing kind of happening behind the scenes is we are about a year or maybe less away from the renegotiation of the USMCA. That was the NAFTA 2.0, you could call it, after President Donald Trump in 2017 renegotiated NAFTA and came up with this USMCA between United States, Mexico, and Canada. And I wanted to bring in Julian to talk a little bit about this because, Julian, there's going to be some impacts from this in multiple industries.
Rudy, good to be here again. Let me tell you, there's already some impacts just from the threat or the perception that there's going to be a full renegotiation of the commercial treaty between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. Already, we are hearing that some investment is on a wait-and-see attitude. We hear that some of the plants are taking this a step further, already reeling from the tariffs. They are accelerating their move toward automating their production lines and just keeping a real close eye on what happens next year when this treaty is under review. Now, let me give you just a brief background of how this works. The treaty was signed exactly 5 years ago by the 3 countries under President Trump's initiative. He wanted to modernize the North America Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, to include some things such as copyright protections, include digital commerce. So we had this treaty that all parties agreed to. Now, what's going on now is that Trump 2.0 is very big on tariffs. He's very big on fairness as far as are we being allowed to export the same amount of goods as other countries are exporting to our country. So there's a big disparity right now between the 3 North American partners. The trade between them is tremendous. For instance, upwards of 840 billion between the U.S. and Mexico every year, around 750 billion with Canada. But a lot of that trade depends on is weighted toward the other countries exporting stuff to the U.S. as opposed to the U.S. exporting stuff to Mexico and Canada. I'll read off some numbers that I have here. For instance, Mexico exports about 80% of the things that they send abroad to the U.S. And the U.S. only exports 32% of the goods that Canada and Mexico import. So there's a big disparity, and that's part of what's going to probably be renegotiated.
Now, just for a little clarity, the president did initially come up with this NAFTA 2.0, if you will, back in 2017. Is there anything that, besides some of those numbers specifically, that has been talked about that needs to be renegotiated?
You're absolutely right. This was his conception. This was his baby. Now, on his second term in office, we see a President Trump that has other priorities, such as bringing industry back. You could say that the initial USMCA was okay with having cars assembled in Mexico, for instance. Now, the Trump 2.0, he wants to bring all that production back to the U.S. So the treaty has to be redone, and that is what is sending jitters down the backs of anybody involved in exporting, importing cars or parts from Mexico to the U.S. They stand to be deeply affected. There's another factor, Rudy, that may come into play this time around. President Trump already has emphasized, you want to do business with us, Mexico, Canada, you got to take care of the illegal immigration. You got to stop migrants from passing through your countries and coming to our doorway. Same with drugs, especially in the case of fentanyl, in the case of Mexico. So what I'm hearing is that there's fears in border industry, in American and Mexican industry that is involved in trade with Mexico, that this might be part of the new NAFTA. And that's a whole different situation altogether because it's something totally out of their control. How would a U.S. industrialist, manufacturer, an importer, be able to do anything about immigration or drugs? So that's a conversation going on. We don't know for sure how the treaty is going to be renegotiated, but we do know for sure that the Commerce Secretary already said, yes, there will be a renegotiation next year.
And how, if let's say this starts happening, they shut down some maquiladoras or factories on the other side of the border here. How does that impact, things that are happening along the border? Because, like, for example, here in the Rio Grande Valley, just in far Texas, I mean, we're talking millions of dollars every day in trade just coming from right over the border in some of those factories.
Yes, I've been having conversation with manufacturers on both sides of the border, and what I'm hearing is that on the U.S. side, it could be a little bit less strenuous because you can always switch to another provider. Maybe not importing from Mexico, but maybe doing business with I don't know, Kansas, Michigan, Ohio. But in the case of the Mexican industrialists, they do depend heavily for jobs, for income, for their economy, for this trade with the United States. So it's an asymmetrical situation. Yeah, business people on the U.S. side of the border could be gravely affected if this thing changes in a way that's not good for them. But the ones on the Mexican side, they really have very little way out. You could say, well, Mexico doesn't do as much business with the U.S. anymore. Let's do business with China. But then the U.S. doesn't want China to come in. And we anticipate that the new treaty is going to be very specific on trying to keep China out of Canada, out of Mexico.
All right, and that's we were just kind of talking about the borders. You're in El Paso, I'm down here in the Rio Grande Valley, but I wanted to bring in our San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera now to talk a bit about what is going on over there on his side of the border.
Well, Rudy, here, like in Texas, and something that Julian alluded to, there's a lot of concern that this new agreement won't be based on free trade, on true capitalism, the way it was intended to be. It's going to be based on tariffs and fees and a lot of contingencies on immigration and drugs, things that are out of the control, as Julian said, of the business people, the guys who are building stuff in Mexico. That is totally out of their hands, and they're afraid that this is the way that President Trump wants to structure this new agreement. And here there's concern because there are billions and billions of dollars worth of trade that's going on a daily basis. These are it happens on both sides of the border. Tens of thousands of jobs are generated by this free trade agreement, and they are afraid that this will hurt the economy along the border and then the economy in the United States. So they're saying here, Rudy, it's been good. There's always room for improvement, but why tinker with success?
Yeah, and again, we always talk about, we were just talking about the screw worm and the cattle industry last week. All these things that are happening, maybe they're happening down on our little slices of the border and happening just on the other side, but these truly could impact everything, whether it's putting food on the table for folks, or, getting your, a new car when you're ready for a new car, or getting that part you need when you can't afford a new car. So it should be interesting to see where that goes. But if you guys could just stick around with me, we're going to come back to both Salvador and Julian in just a little bit. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're watching Border Report Live. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and joining me now is our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera. Salvador, we were talking a little bit about the break, before the break, about trade and things happening. But, one little part of trade that happens between Mexico and U.S. is folks crossing the border daily, whether it to come here to go to work, or to go over there for, a quick bite to eat, or to visit family. One of the things that my mom always encounters here, and actually just last night she had to cross over to Matamoros from downtown Brownsville, and on the way back it was about a 2-hour wait in an incredibly long line to get back into the United States. We have several ports of entry here down in San Diego. How do things look?
Well, you nailed it. The ability or inability to get people across the border is really hurting the economy. We always hear that if we could get folks across the border rapidly, or at least in the recent amount of time, that we would have a lot more jobs created, a lot more money flowing in both directions. But that is just not the case here in San Diego, especially at the San Isidro Port of Entry. That is a daily occurrence here between San Diego and Tijuana. 90,000 cars every morning line up to cross the border. And then you have about 20,000 people on foot who wait to go across the border into the San Diego area. And this is becoming a huge delay for folks. It is not only hurting their quality of life, because a lot of times they have to get up like at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, just to get ready to get in line, to wait for 2 to 3 hours to cross the border and make it to their jobs by 5 in the morning. There are some plans in the works to get people across the border. One such project that has been discussed is creating these special lanes for people who will pay a fee to get across the border and then have access to public transportation on the San Diego side of the border. A few months ago, I did a story on this very project, and I want you to look at it to get familiar with what I'm talking about, to see if, in your eyes, this seems like it's a reasonable thing to do.
These are just some of the thousands of pedestrians who crossed the border on Monday at the San Isidro Port of Entry. For most, it was not a quick process. Adrian Diaz told us it's been taking him about 2 hours to get across the border on his daily commute from Tijuana to San Diego for work. He and others said they would welcome a special lane to get them across the San Isidro Port of Entry much faster, even if it means paying a fee. Diaz says it's a good idea. Recently, Baja California's Secretary of the Economy and Innovation reported talks are progressing with U.S. Customs and Border Protection to build special lanes that would give commuters an option to cross the border faster. It would be patterned after the CBX, a pedestrian bridge that takes travelers to and from the Tijuana airport, provided they pay a fee and have the proper documentation. Diaz says for people who are in a hurry to cross the border, these new lanes would be ideal. The fee to cross the border faster would include rides on the San Diego trolley. There's a stop just outside the port of entry in San Isidro. Many already ride it to downtown and other areas in San Diego. Diaz says trolley access would be a plus. He told us he and many others would be interested in using the special fast lanes if they ever become a reality. CBP has not discussed the project in public, but Baja officials say they are very confident it will happen, although they are not committing to a time frame.
Of course, the idea has yet to be finalized. Customs and Border Protection has not signed off. There's still questions of money. How do you build these special lanes? How do you get them across the border? How do you staff these special lanes with CBP personnel? So a lot of details still to be worked out. Another idea that has been discussed is to create a special lane for people who are pre-screened and people who cross the border almost on a daily basis. They would literally just zip by U.S. Customs and Border Protection on their way north to their jobs, to school. But again, that's an idea that has been stalled, also being discussed. Right now, we're getting close to something that appears to be happening. We're talking about a ferry service for people to cross the border via the water. This is the Azteca Express ferry that would begin working or will go into operation here in the next few weeks. People would be able to take the ferry from the port of Ensenada, which is about 70 miles south of the border, and then go on a 2-hour cruise up to downtown San Diego to the harbor here in San Diego. It would cost anywhere from $50 to $60. The ride itself will take about 2 hours. Now, this project is about to get going, so it's going to be a reality. Truth be told, something very similar took place about 15, 20 years ago without much success. People decided, well, why am I going to get on a ferry for 2 hours and I still have to go to Customs and Border Protection, and then I'm in downtown San Diego, likely not where I really want to be. So we'll see if it works. We'll see if it does happen. The waits are much longer nowadays, so people might be prone to give it a shot. But again, $50 to $60 per trip, that seems a little pricey and perhaps a little too steep for some folks to pay.
Yeah,
now,
definitely.
Other news. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, you know, that there was that mention of, you know, a special lane and how long that would take. And, you know, there's talks about it, but that would, if I'm not mistaken, almost a literal act of Congress to get something like that done, no?
And perhaps now, with the Congress we have and the climate in Washington, perhaps it's not going to be doable. They want to invest money in other things like, you know, immigration rates, as opposed to getting people across the border. That doesn't have to have the same type of priority.
And just another question on what you were talking about. You said that there would be fees for this special lane if it were to come to fruition. Do you guys on your side of the border pay anything to cross over into Mexico right now?
No, but I know in Texas, people who use the bridges have to. We are perhaps blessed, lucky. We already pay a lot of taxes in California. So you could say that indirectly we're already paying for it. But no, if you want to cross the border either into Mexico or out of Mexico into the U.S., it is absolutely free. There is a third border crossing in the works here in the immediate Tijuana, San Diego region that if it ever gets built, it will have a fee. It'll be a toll crossing in both directions, but that is still years away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Salvador. I know you had some other stuff to talk about, but we will get to that next week after the weekend. Thanks so much for joining us today.
You got it.
All right. Well, stay with us because when we come back, we're going to talk about something that will definitely impact the border, especially the U.S.-Texas border. And we're going to bring Julian back into talking about it. I'm talking about redistricting here in the state of Texas. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. Thank you for joining us for this Friday afternoon edition. My name is Rudy Mireles, and we're going to get to Julian Resendiz, our El Paso correspondent, in just a moment to talk more about this. But we're talking about redistricting here in the state of Texas now. Now, here in this state lawmakers have started the process of redrawing our congressional maps. Thursday was actually the first of 3 public hearings being held at the Texas House Committee holding to gather public comment. Now, Texas Democrats have been pretty critical of the Republican-led effort to redraw the congressional maps known as redistricting. President Donald Trump has said to reporters he wants state lawmakers to redraw the map to help pick up to 5 additional Republican seats ahead of the midterm elections.
Mid-decade redistricting is pointless, unjust, and we won't let that happen quietly. I'm here to fight. We all need to raise our voices to protect democracy for every Texan.
That was State Representative John Rosenthal, who is among many Democrats who argue the move is illegal and is targeting minority-held seats. Now, the House committee will hold a hearing in Houston on Saturday and Arlington, Texas, that's near Dallas, on Monday. Now, after those hearings, they could discuss and take action on legislation to start redistricting officially the lines across the state. Now, Beto O'Rourke, former congressman and former Democratic gubernatorial candidate, is among those opposing the redistricting efforts. He and Democratic lawmakers actually held a rally at the Texas Capitol in Austin on Thursday against those Trump administration redistricting efforts. And he was one of those who spoke against this proposal.
The president understands that in order to continue this consolidation of authoritarian power and to destroy this democracy once and for all, he has to retain control in the United States House of Representatives, where he currently has a very narrow majority.
Now, I wanted to bring in Julian Resendiz, our El Paso correspondent. Julian, you've been following this redistricting now since all the talks about it happened. We're in a special session now. Fill us in on what exactly is going on here.
Well, I can tell you, first of all, that Beto O'Rourke used to represent us here in El Paso. He was a congressperson from El Paso. What I can tell you is that this is causing a lot of concern at the local level and also in minority communities, not just on the border, but also in places like Dallas County, Harris County, which may be targets for this redistricting. What I can tell you is that not only am I covering now the redistricting issue now, but I also was involved in leading coverage when I was in Dallas of the 2011 redistricting. And I sat down and spoke to both sides at length. And on the one hand, like I said, there is concern that when you politically gerrymander a map that has to do with who represents you in Congress, you might be disenfranchising particularly minority communities like the Hispanic community, which has a lower voter turnout rate than non-Hispanic whites. So it's very important for them to keep a district in which if you have a majority of Hispanics, that majority can elect somebody of their choice. On the other hand, when I spoke to some of the GOP back then, that concern was, okay, so this is not fair from the start, because right now under current law, the census, the districts include also undocumented immigrants. And the Supreme Court has upheld that until recently. So they're saying, well, we need to do something that truly represents those who are able to vote, that their will be affected. Anyway, so the point is that this is a very heated issue on both sides of the aisle. Both sides have very strong arguments, I think. And the result is that minority communities right now are extremely worried. Here in El Paso, a local state representative has just announced that there will be a series of hearings, so people not only can express their opinion, but also get the resources to get involved to sort of defend their vote. Also, the current El Paso congresswoman who represents El Paso, Veronica Escobar, has just filed what she calls the Anti-Rigging Act, which would ban this redistricting process in mid-decade. Right now, when people ask why is Mr. Abbott, why are the Republicans doing this? The answer is because they can't. There's nothing in the law currently that prevents them from doing so. So Ms. Escobar wants to do something about that.
And you know, I just wanted to talk, like, it's just redistricting Texas, but that could have a huge impact on not just border security, but immigration issues, everything that is impacted by the border, right?
Rudy, what's at stake here is not just Texas. It's pretty much control of the U.S. House of Representatives in years to come. So yeah, this will impact everybody in the country. If there are 5 new Republican districts, that means more Republican influence in Congress and possibly control of the House.
And one last question, Julian. I know a lot of folks, as we mentioned, there is going to be 3 hearings in Austin, but a lot of folks are going to be affected by this in Texas. Have you heard from anyone that says there should be more hearings?
Definitely. Practically every elected official in El Paso who is a Democrat wants to have more hearings. They want, and like I said, not just hearings, they want people to get involved, to show up at the hearings, to express their opinion, to know where to send the emails, where to make the phone calls. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of activism going on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Julian. Julian Resendiz, our El Paso correspondent. Thank you for joining us. Again, thank you to Salvador Rivera for joining us from San Diego. Real quick, before we go, we want to remind you to check out our partners at Political Power Ranker. Now, Political Power Ranker is a weekly show tracking the movers, the shakers, and rule makers in American politics. Nextstar's Director of Political Content, Chris Berg, and Director of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball, break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on my favorite thing, data. Last week was focused on the Texas Senate race, which, again, if you're watching us, you already know the impact that's going to have on the border. So make sure to check it out. You can find more on Political Power Ranker on your local Nextstar station's website. And that is going to do it for us. Thanks for watching.